Hey, JulesBlessedVegan, and as always, welcome to my channel. And for those of you who are new, I know you can benefit. So yesterday I started talking about rigorous honesty and the importance of rigorous honesty, and I want to do another part on that because it's such an important topic. So one thing that came to mind regarding rigorous honesty was that it leads to loneliness when you're not being completely honest. And what I mean by that is because I should stick with me statements. When I'm not being completely honest, it's not fair to the people around me, because then at some point I'm kind of like, well, why don't they know, or why don't they care? Well, how can they know and how can they care? Because I haven't divulged whatever it is. It also makes me want to isolate at the risk of getting caught, like with whatever it is. It leads, to my being shame-based, because the devil absolutely loves people to be in the dark and to be hiding in secrets, right? And I think right now, with our total social media world beyond belief, and people are more depressed and feel more isolated than ever. And I think part of that is because of rigorous honesty. They're so busy giving the perfect screenshot so that no one can tell that in real life they've put on 25 pounds during the COVID. They're a total flippin' mess. They don't even have on pants, okay? So the illusion that's being projected is leading to total isolation and depression. And again, people not feeling like anybody knows them. And people don't, because they're not telling their truth. When I was in the height of my dis-ease, especially with my compulsive overeating, I never would have said what my weight was. No way. No way in the whole wide world. And now I put it out everywhere and readily affirm all the time that I weighed 330, that I weighed 281, that I'm just barely under 200 now. And, I just talk about it. And that is like a huge shock, okay? And some people wish I was a little less honest, because they're like, Julie, if you're weighing that and I'm heavier than you, you just told people what I weigh. It's that kind of thing. And I'm just like, there is a lot of freedom in not hiding, but there's a risk. People are vicious and awful. They love to give their opinion. It's super safe when they're online. It's so much easier to focus outward instead of in. So I get it, because I do have people saying some ugly things. And then I'm thinking, well, you're finally famous enough to get criticism. Let's roll with that. Okay, anyway, this is a really interesting one. It's called Rigorous Honesty is a Tool, Not a Weapon. It's a tool, not a weapon. And of course, I'll include it in the description of this video. And it's by Big Step, just Big Step, I guess. All right, I'll include it. Anyway, that's interesting to me, because in the 12-step program, it does say that you need to make amends, but only to the extent that it doesn't bring even greater harm to the person that you're making amends to. You'd never want to show up at somebody's house and say, wow, I'm so sorry for the affair that we had for 12 years with the wife standing next to the guy. Yeah, that's bringing more harm. Okay, so, there's certain times that being rigorously honest should be kept in your heart or your journal or with your confessor, right? Okay. So it says there are some concepts within the 12-step community that are more difficult to grasp and live by than others. One of the most complicated is rigorous honesty. Even for those of us who grew up in households where honesty was taught and valued, it is difficult to live for very long in a life of active addiction, so whatever your disordered eating is, and remember how to tell the truth, or even what is the truth. I completely get that. Learning or relearning the best way, best time, and best place to talk about difficult truths is a struggle for most everyone. For those of us in substance use recovery, it can be particularly fraught, as we are told repeatedly that our recovery and our very lives depend on our ability and willingness to tell the truth. Yeah, stepping out of darkness, not only is it way too bright and hurt your eyes, but it can just be scary. If the truth hurts others, you're probably doing it wrong. It's a great statement. There's a litmus test for being honest that we use around here. Does it need to be said? Does it need to be said by me? Does it need to be said right now? Those are the three things to consider. First of all, does it even need to be said? I mean, when you go up and say, oh, so-and-so said that you look totally fat and ugly today, really? How is that serving anyone? Like, really? You had to tell me that? Okay, so yeah, that probably didn't need to be said. Does it need to be said by me? Meaning, is it your side of the street to be cleaning up? Is that really your problem? Or is that somebody else's story to be told? And does it need to be said right now? Like, 911, what's your emergency? Is there really an emergency? Does it really need to be said right now? Sometimes you kind of have to look at what the intention was in your heart. It may not match the action. So it says it takes away a lot of the confusion about being honest. Being rigorously honest does not mean spouting off every truth or opinion that crosses our minds in that moment. In early recovery, that can be a particularly appealing and dangerous proposition. Faced with the newfound challenge to be rigorously honest, some of us may feel compelled to say things such as, I never really liked you, or I think we should get a divorce, or to be frankly honest with a customer of our employer in a way that might cause harm to our workplace or lose our job. We say things that may be or seem perfectly true in the moment, but which we may regret in 6 months or in 6 minutes. That is so true, isn't it? Rigorous honesty is not a standalone practice. It is part of a journey of personal and spiritual growth that will shape itself over time. It is something that we learn how to do, and we learn it with the guidance of other people, especially like in the 12-step program and having a sponsor, hopefully including a 12-step program or a spiritual guide. The first person we must be honest with is ourselves. Oh my gosh, stop going outside to fix the world when you haven't even fixed yourself. Learning personal honesty, developing the ability to understand our true feelings, our motivations, our fears, our strengths, our desires or weaknesses, that must come first. And it comes through the steps. In the 4th step, we take a personal inventory. That is a really difficult one. You literally just write and write and write and write and write about everything you may have wronged and wronged and wronged and wronged. Again, with yourself at the top of the list. How have you wronged yourself? So you take a personal inventory, then you share it with another person. And eventually, after some more spiritual and personal development, we share with others the truth about ourselves. So first, it's all working on yourself. You don't need to go running around telling your nonsense, your truth to people. Okay, this is an inner journey. That is when we are rigorously honest, not when someone asks if we'd like the cake they baked for us. A cake that is baked for us is always delicious, no matter what it tastes like, because someone cared enough to bake it. That is the spiritual truth. And that is much more important in developing and maintaining personal relationships than being a rigorously honest amateur food critic. That's an interesting metaphor right there. Actually, it's a simile because it has like. A cake that is baked for us is always delicious, no matter what it tastes like, because someone cared enough to bake it. That is the spiritual truth. And that is much more important in developing and maintaining personal relationships than being a rigorously honest amateur food critic. That's not to say that spiritual truth and rigorous honesty are always separate. They are usually one and the same. And that is also not to say that spiritual truth cannot be painful for the listener to hear. When the answer to the question, do you think I'm heading for a relapse, is yes, there are kind and gentle and helpful ways to say it, but it must be said. As a general rule, a painful truth should be as painful for the speaker to say as the listener to hear. Oh my gosh, isn't that true? When you've been grappling and grappling over how to say something to someone because you love them so much, because you know it may hurt, that's where you're coming from your best heart, honestly. A truth told at someone else's expense, a malicious truth, is a rejection of the truth of recovery. It's a rejection of the possibility of others, of love, and of hope itself. Keeping our rigor focused on ourselves is the best way to avoid the hubris that almost inevitably comes along with excessive and unnecessary truth-telling. Forgive me for laughing, but when I was a little girl, very little, like 2 years old, 3 years old, but probably until I was about 6. But at 2 or 3, I was known as a mimicker, okay? And part of that, of course, all children listen and mimic, which is how we learn to speak. But it was kind of a game that my siblings played, and I had 10 other siblings, right? All a year apart. And they'd like to say these huge sentences and super complicated words, and I could rattle them off, and they thought it was so funny, and I was considered a mimicker. Unfortunately, I was also a tattletale to an extent in my home, and I would run around, and again, 2 years old, 3 years old. And when I'd overhear things, I'd run and say, so-and-so doesn't like you. And Mom said, and Dad said, and it was just super unnecessary. It was all true. It was super unnecessary. And my father finally said, what did he say to me? Juliana, I think he said, Juliana, stop your malicious ways. Stop your malicious ways, Juliana. Okay, so it says the truth that people in our lives need to hear from us is that we love them and that we are grateful for their love. Are you kidding me? Does it get better than that? The truth that people in our lives need to hear from us is that we love them and that we are grateful for their love. Word. Okay. I don't know how much of that you can relate to. Some of you are 12-steppers. A lot of you aren't. But I'm sure you can get the idea that telling your truth keeps you out of darkness. Telling your truth in an appropriate way keeps you out of the doghouse. I'll say that. All right. We'll talk about that more. As always, like if you like, join us if you haven't, subscribe. Let me know in the comments below how I may support you, especially in food, in prayer, in 12 steps. If I don't know the answer, I'll help you find it. And until we talk again, my friends, best of all, know that it's only 11:15 at night and that you're blessed.